The night my son told me to eat in the kitchen. I was wearing the blue dress my husband bought me before he died. The dining room glowed with candlelight. Crystal glasses sparkled. Daniel's business guests laughed around the long table while I stood beside an empty chair, waiting for my son to look at me the way he once did when he was a little boy. Instead, he lowered his voice and said, "Mom, would you mind eating in the kitchen tonight? It'll just make things easier." My daughter-in-law avoided my eyes. My granddaughter looked horrified, and I stood there holding my plate, realizing that somehow I had become a stranger in the family I built. Later that night, while everyone else was laughing, I quietly decided to change my will. If you've ever felt invisible inside your own family, I hope you'll stay with me until the end of this story. Please like and subscribe if these stories speak to your heart. And I'd truly love to hear from you in the comments. Tell me how you would have responded if your own child had treated you this way. Also, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. Tonight, I'm sharing the hardest lesson I ever learned about love, family, and self-respect. When people hear a story like mine, they usually ask the same question. How could a son do something like that to his own mother? For a long time, I asked myself the same thing. The truth is that Daniel Thornton was not born selfish. He was not born cruel. He was my miracle. I was 26 years old when I gave birth to him in a small hospital outside Columbus, Ohio. My husband, Harold, stood beside me, holding my hand so tightly that his knuckles turned white. When the nurse placed Daniel in my arms, Harold cried harder than I did. "He's going to do something important one day," Harold whispered, and for many years, I believed he would. Our life was never easy. Harold worked as a construction engineer, often leaving before sunrise and returning after dark. I worked part-time at the local library and later became a school librarian. We never had much money, but we had enough. At least we thought we did. Everything changed when Daniel was 13. Harold began complaining about chest pains. At first, he ignored them. He said it was stress. Long hours, too much coffee, too many responsibilities. But one November morning, he collapsed in our kitchen while making toast. The ambulance came quickly. The doctors tried everything. They could not save him. I still remember standing beside his hospital bed while the machines became silent. I remember holding his wedding ring in my hand because they had taken it off before the surgery. Most of all, I remember Daniel. My son sat in a chair beside the window. He was only 13 years old, and he looked terrified. When we returned home that night, he climbed into my bed. "I'll take care of you now, Mom," he said. No mother forgets words like that. For the next several years, life became a struggle. Harold had left us some savings, but not enough. The mortgage still needed to be paid. Bills continued arriving. Daniel needed clothes, school supplies, food, a future. So I worked. I worked harder than I ever thought possible. I kept my position at the school library during the day. In the evenings, I cataloged books for the county library. During summer vacations, I helped organize archives at the Historical Society. There were weeks when I slept 4 hours a night, but Daniel never saw me complain. Every morning, I packed his lunch. Every evening, I asked about school. Every Christmas, There were presents under the tree. Maybe fewer than before. Maybe smaller. But there were always presents. One December, when Daniel was 16, he wanted to attend a summer science program in Chicago. The tuition was more money than I had. I knew he would never ask me if he understood the cost. So I sold my mother's gold bracelet. The bracelet had been given to me on my wedding day. My mother had worn it. Her mother had worn it. I cried in my car after leaving the jewelry store. That evening, I handed Daniel the acceptance papers. "You can go," I told him. He stared at me. "How?" "Don't worry about that." Years later, I learned that he had discovered what I sold. He cried when he found out. At least he did then. When Daniel graduated from high school, he gave a speech at the ceremony. I can still hear his voice. My mother taught me that love means sacrifice. Everyone stood and applauded. I sat in the audience with tears running down my face. After graduation, Daniel attended Ohio State University. Again, money was difficult. I refinanced our home. I took extra work. I skipped vacations. I postponed replacing my old car. Some months, I lived on canned soup and sandwiches. But my son graduated with honors. The day he received his diploma, he wrapped his arms around me. "You won't have to worry anymore, Mom." Those words became my treasure. Years later, Daniel found work in real estate. He was intelligent, charming, hardworking. Clients liked him. His career advanced quickly. Soon, he was earning more money in a year than Harold and I had earned in 5. I was proud. I told everyone about my son, the ladies at church, my coworkers, neighbors, friends. If someone mentioned their children, I mentioned Daniel. He's doing very well. He works so hard. His father would be proud. And perhaps Harold would have been. Daniel called me every Sunday during his first years away. We talked about everything: his work, his dreams, his worries. Sometimes he drove 2 hours just to fix something around my house. He mowed the lawn, cleaned the gutters, changed light bulbs. Once, after finding me carrying groceries alone, he scolded me. "You're not supposed to do heavy lifting anymore." "I'm only 62. I laughed. "You're my mother," he answered. Back then, those words felt like safety. Then he met Melissa. I want to be fair. At first, I liked her. She was beautiful, confident, successful. She worked in marketing and always seemed to know exactly what to say. Daniel looked happy. That was enough for me. During their engagement, Melissa often asked about our family history, about Harold, about the house, about my life. I assumed she simply wanted to know me better. I even showed her old photo albums. She smiled politely. She admired Harold's antique watch. She asked how long I had owned the house. She asked if it was fully paid off. At the time, the questions seemed harmless. Perhaps they were. Perhaps they weren't. The wedding was beautiful. Daniel cried when he saw Melissa walking down the aisle. I cried watching my son become a husband. At the reception, he raised his glass toward me. My mother taught me everything about loyalty. Everyone applauded again. I believed every word. After the wedding, they bought a large house in a wealthy suburb outside Columbus. 4 bedrooms, beautiful kitchen, large dining room, a backyard overlooking a small lake. I visited often, at first, but slowly, something changed. Phone calls became shorter, visits became less frequent, birthdays were postponed, holidays became complicated. There was always work, always travel, always obligations. I told myself this was normal. Children grow up, they build lives. Mothers learn to step back. Still, some nights, I sat alone in my living room, staring at family photographs. One picture showed Daniel at 8 years old, his front tooth missing, his arms around my neck. Written on the back in crooked handwriting were the words, "I love my mom forever." I would trace those letters with my fingers, and I would wonder, at what point does forever begin to disappear? Because the little boy who promised to take care of me was still somewhere inside my son. At least, I desperately wanted to believe he was. I had no idea how much our lives were about to change. And I certainly never imagined that one day the same boy who once begged me never to leave him would ask me to eat alone in a kitchen. Success did not arrive all at once for Daniel. It came slowly, one sale, then another. A promotion, a larger office, better clients. Within a few years, my son had become one of the most successful real estate agents in Columbus. He specialized in luxury homes, and his name began appearing in local magazines. He wore tailored suits. He drove expensive cars. He attended charity dinners and business events. And every time I saw his photograph in a newspaper article, my heart swelled with pride. I kept clippings in a drawer beside my bed. Sometimes I would pull them out and show them to my friend Grace Bennett during our weekly coffee meetings. "That's my son," I would say. Grace would smile. "You've always talked about him like he hung the moon." Maybe I had. Perhaps mothers often do. After Daniel married Melissa, their lives became even more polished. They purchased a beautiful 2-story home in Dublin, outside Columbus. The house overlooked a small lake and sat inside a neighborhood filled with stone entryways, perfectly trimmed lawns, and expensive cars. When I visited for the first time, Daniel gave me a tour. "This is the family room. This is my office. This will be Emily's bedroom someday." At the time, Melissa was pregnant. I remember touching the wall of the nursery. "Harold would have loved this," I whispered. Daniel smiled. "He helped build it. Mom, everything you and Dad did got me here." Those words stayed with me when Emily was born. I became a grandmother at 63. She was tiny, beautiful. She had Daniel's eyes. I spent hours rocking her while Melissa rested. I knitted blankets, read stories, sang old songs my own mother had sung to me. For a while, everything felt perfect. Every Sunday dinner was held at their house. Melissa cooked. Daniel grilled outside. I brought desserts. Emily sat on my lap. Those evenings became the center of my life. But slowly, almost so slowly that I hardly noticed, things began to change. The Sunday dinners became once a month. Then, every few months, Daniel's phone calls became shorter. "I'm busy. Mom, we have clients. I'll call you next week." Sometimes next week never came. I would leave messages. "Just checking on you. Tell Emily Grandma says hello. No response. Then, 2 days later, sorry, Mom, crazy week. I always understood, or at least I pretended to. Melissa, meanwhile, seemed increasingly concerned with appearances. She talked about social circles, connections, image, the right schools, the right neighborhoods, the right people. One Christmas, I brought my traditional pecan pie to dinner. Melissa looked uncomfortable. Oh, I actually ordered desserts from a bakery. I know everyone loves your pie, I said. She smiled politely. I'm just trying to keep things elegant. I laughed it off. Daniel said nothing. Another time, I offered to help decorate for Thanksgiving. Melissa handed me napkins to fold while she arranged expensive centerpieces. When guests arrived, she introduced me as, "This is Daniel's mother." Not Vivian, not family, simply Daniel's mother. Small things, tiny things, things easy to excuse, yet they began piling up. My 65th birthday came and went. Daniel forgot. 2 days later, he called. I'm so sorry. Mom, work has been insane. I told him it was fine. After all, he sounded exhausted. When I hung up, I sat alone in my kitchen and stared at the birthday cake Grace had brought me. Only 3 candles. Grace had laughed. We're old enough to stop counting. But after she left, I cried. Not because of my age, because my son had forgotten. Emily, however, never forgot. She called me that evening. Happy birthday, Grandma. Thank you, sweetheart. Dad forgot. Didn't he? Children often see things adults pretend not to notice. I hesitated. He has a lot going on. Emily was quiet. He used to talk about you all the time. The words surprised me. What do you mean? When I was little, he said you were the strongest person he knew. I felt tears building again. What does he say now? Emily became silent. Then she whispered, mostly he talks about work. As Emily grew older, she and I became close. She loved books, art, history. She preferred reading beside the lake rather than attending social events with her parents. She reminded me of Harold, and perhaps that was why Melissa often seemed frustrated with her daughter. You need to be more outgoing. You need confidence. You need ambition. Emily simply wanted peace. One afternoon, when Emily was 14, she visited my house alone. We baked cookies together. She sat at my kitchen table and said something I never forgot. Grandma, do you think people change? Everyone changes. But completely? I looked at her. Why are you asking? She stared at her hands. Sometimes Dad isn't the same person he used to be. I wanted to defend him. I always defended him. He works very hard. I know. He has responsibilities. She nodded. But he used to listen more. I couldn't argue, because I had noticed it too. Daniel interrupted people now. He checked his phone constantly. He measured time in dollars and opportunities, sometimes during conversations. His eyes wandered elsewhere, as if he were already thinking about the next meeting, the next sale, the next goal. Meanwhile, my own life had become quieter. I retired from the school library at 66. The ceremony was lovely. Students gave speeches. Teachers brought flowers. I drove home carrying gifts and cards. The house felt very empty. For 30 years, I had spent my days surrounded by people. Suddenly, there was silence. I missed Harold. I missed my work. I missed being needed. Daniel visited less often. Melissa rarely called. Emily texted whenever she could. Sometimes I would sit on my porch and watch the sunset over our neighborhood, the same neighborhood where Daniel had ridden bicycles, played baseball, learned to drive. I often wondered if success had simply carried him too far away. One evening, he finally visited. He looked tired, older. The lines around his eyes had deepened. We sat together, drinking coffee. For a moment, he looked like my little boy again. "How are you doing?" "Mom." I smiled. "I'm fine." "Are you lonely?" I wanted to answer honestly, but mothers often protect their children from guilt. So I lied. "No." He stared into his coffee. "You know, Melissa thinks maybe someday you should move closer to us." My heart warmed. "Really? We're just thinking about the future." At that moment, I believed my son still remembered his promise. The promise he made beside my hospital bed after Harold died. The promise he made at his college graduation. The promise he made every time he said he would always take care of me. I had no idea that the future he imagined and the future I imagined were very different things. And I certainly didn't know that the beautiful house by the lake would eventually become the loneliest place I had ever lived. The fall itself was not serious. At least, that was what the doctor told me. But sometimes, a small accident changes everything. It happened on a rainy Thursday afternoon in early October. I had climbed onto a kitchen stool to reach a box of Christmas decorations I kept above the cabinets. Harold used to bring those boxes down every year. After he died, I learned to do many things alone. Perhaps I should have asked for help. Perhaps pride becomes dangerous when you grow older. The stool slipped. I landed hard on my side. For several minutes, I lay on the kitchen floor staring at the ceiling. Nothing seemed broken. But getting up was another matter. My hip hurt. My shoulder throbbed. And for the first time in my life, I realized that if something truly happened to me, no one would know until much later. Grace found me. She had stopped by unexpectedly to return a book. When she opened the front door, she discovered me sitting against the kitchen cabinets trying not to cry. "Vivian, I'm all right." "No, you're not." She drove me to the emergency room. The doctors performed x-rays. No broken bones. No serious injuries. Only bruises. But the doctor looked at me kindly before leaving. "Do you live alone?" "Yes." "Do you have family nearby?" "My son?" He nodded. "It may be time to think about having some support." Those words followed me home. Support. Such a simple word. Yet it sounded very close to dependence. Daniel arrived later that evening. Grace had called him. He walked into my house looking genuinely frightened. "Mom, why didn't you call me? I didn't want to bother you." He sat beside me on the sofa. "You're never a bother." For a moment, He sounded exactly like the young man I remembered. Melissa came shortly afterward. She brought flowers, soup, magazines. She kissed my cheek. "You gave us quite a scare," I smiled. "I'm sorry." Emily wrapped her arms around me. "Grandma, you scared me." That evening felt strangely warm. The four of them sat in my living room. The house felt alive again. Daniel walked through the rooms quietly. He examined the staircase, the laundry room, the basement steps. Finally, he sat down beside me. "You can't keep doing this alone." I laughed softly. "I've been doing it alone for years." "That's exactly the problem." Melissa nodded. "We've been talking about this for a while." My heart skipped. "Talking about what?" Daniel leaned forward. "Moving in with us." The room became quiet. Even now, years later, I remember exactly how those words felt. Like relief, like safety, like finally being seen. "I couldn't ask you to do that." "You aren't asking." Melissa smiled. "You'd have your own room." Emily practically bounced in her seat. "Please say yes." Daniel took my hand. "You took care of me my whole life. Let me take care of you now." I nearly cried. Because for one beautiful moment, I believed I was hearing my son again. Not the businessman, not the busy husband, not the distracted father. My son, the little boy who once promised to protect me. The following weeks became a whirlwind of decisions. I didn't want to sell my house. Not yet. The house held Harold. It held 35 years of marriage, Christmas mornings, birthday parties, arguments, laughter, life. So we decided I would keep it. Daniel suggested renting it later. "It'll always be yours." Those words comforted me. I packed slowly. Photo albums, books, clothes, Harold's watch, our wedding album, the blue vase my mother had given me. Emily helped whenever she could. She carefully wrapped dishes in newspaper. She labeled boxes. One afternoon, she found Harold's old fishing hat. "Did Grandpa really wear this every summer?" She smiled. "I wish I'd known him." "So do I." Melissa also helped, at least in the beginning, though I noticed she seemed especially interested in certain things. The house, the savings, insurance papers, investments. One afternoon, she asked casually, "What happens with the house eventually?" I looked up. "I'm not sure. Daniel says it's paid off." "Yes?" She nodded thoughtfully. "That's wonderful." Another day, she asked about Harold's retirement account. I assumed she was helping me organize. At my age, financial matters often become important. I didn't think much about it. Perhaps I should have. The hardest part was my car. My old Buick had been with me for 14 years. Daniel suggested selling it. "You won't need it." "I might." "Mom, we'll drive you anywhere." He sounded sincere. Eventually, I agreed. The day the car was sold, I sat in my driveway longer than necessary. It felt like giving away another piece of independence. Grace visited before the move. She brought coffee and cinnamon rolls. "Are you sure about this?" "Of course." She looked around my kitchen. "You love this house." "I'll still have it." She hesitated. "Living with adult children can be complicated." I smiled. "Daniel isn't like that." She didn't argue, but I noticed concern in her eyes. Moving day arrived in early November. Daniel rented a truck. Emily carried boxes. Melissa directed furniture placement. My new bedroom overlooked the lake. The room was beautiful. Fresh paint, new curtains, a comfortable chair beside the window. Emily had placed flowers on the nightstand. A handwritten note sat beside them. "Welcome home, Grandma." I cried when I read it. That evening, we sat together eating dinner. For the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. Daniel told stories about work. Emily talked about school. Melissa discussed a charity event. The lake reflected the sunset through the windows. I thought, this is what growing older is supposed to look like. Family, safety, belonging. Before bed, Daniel knocked on my door. "You okay?" I smiled. "I think so." He sat beside me. "You'll never be alone again." I reached for his hand. "Your father would be proud of you." His expression softened. "I hope so." For several weeks, everything seemed wonderful. Emily and I drank coffee together in the mornings. I helped with dinners. I folded laundry. I read in the sunroom. Neighbors visited. People seemed kind. Yet there were small moments, small things, easy to ignore. One evening, Melissa asked if I still maintained my investment accounts. Another day, she wondered whether I had updated my will after Harold died. Daniel asked where important documents were kept. "It would be good for us to know in case of emergencies." That sounded reasonable. After all, they were taking care of me now. Weren't they? One night, I stood outside my bedroom window looking at the lake. The house was quiet, everyone asleep. For the first time in many years, I felt protected. I believed I had made the right choice. I believed I had come home. I did not yet understand that sometimes people can welcome you into a house without making room for you in their lives. And I certainly didn't know that the bedroom with the beautiful lake view would eventually begin to feel more like a guest room than a home. For the first few weeks, living in Daniel's house felt almost like a second chance. I woke each morning to sunlight reflecting off the lake. Emily and I drank coffee together before school. Daniel kissed my cheek before leaving for work. Melissa smiled politely while preparing breakfast. I told Grace over the phone that perhaps I had worried for nothing. "I think this may actually work," I said. She was quiet for a moment. "I hope so." Vivian. At first, the changes were small. So small that they almost seemed reasonable. One morning, I sat in the family room watching an old movie. Melissa walked in carrying several decorative pillows. "Oh, Vivian, would you mind using the sunroom during the day?" I muted the television. "Of course. Why?" "I have a designer coming this afternoon. I want the house to look perfect." I smiled. "Certainly." The sunroom was pleasant enough. Large windows, comfortable chairs, still. I noticed that I had been moved out of the room where the family spent most of its time. A few days later, Melissa approached me while I was cooking. "I've already planned dinner tonight." "I was only making soup." She forced a smile. "I know. It's just that I like keeping the kitchen organized." I put the ingredients away. Again, it seemed reasonable. It was her kitchen, her house. At least, that was what I kept telling myself. Weeks passed. The small adjustments continued. When guests visited, Melissa often asked me to stay in my room until everyone settled. "If you come down later, it'll be easier." Easier for whom, I never asked. One Saturday morning, I walked into the living room wearing one of my favorite sweaters. It had belonged to Harold, a soft blue cardigan he had bought me years earlier. Melissa looked me up and down. "You know, some newer clothes might make you feel younger." I laughed. "I happen to like this one. It's just a little old-fashioned." The comment itself wasn't cruel, but it stayed with me. After that, I began noticing how often she corrected me. My hairstyle, my shoes, my choice of books, my cooking, even the way I folded towels. Daniel usually said nothing. That hurt more than Melissa's words. One evening, I tried discussing it with him. He had just returned from work and was loosening his tie. "Daniel, do you think Melissa is unhappy that I'm here?" He looked surprised. "What? Of course not. Sometimes I feel as if I'm in the way." He sighed. "Mom, Melissa likes things organized. I'm organized." "I know. It's just different." Different. The word seemed harmless, yet it created distance between us. I stopped offering to cook, stopped decorating, stopped making suggestions. I became careful, very careful. I closed cabinet doors quietly. I washed dishes immediately. I folded blankets. I stayed out of rooms when people were working. I tried to become invisible. The strangest thing was that Emily noticed before anyone else. One afternoon, she found me sitting alone in the sunroom reading. "Why are you always in here now?" I smiled. "I like it." She frowned. "No, you don't." Teenagers often speak with uncomfortable honesty. "I do." She sat beside me. "You used to sit with us." Kamal. "I still do." "No, Grandma, not really." I looked away. Outside. Leaves drifted across the lake. Emily lowered her voice. "Mom gets upset when you move things." "I don't move things." "I know." I didn't know what to say. She reached for my hand. "I'm glad you're here." That simple sentence nearly made me cry, because increasingly, Emily was the only person who seemed genuinely happy to have me there. One evening, Daniel and Melissa hosted several neighbors for wine and appetizers. I offered to help. Melissa shook her head. "We've got it covered." As guests arrived, I entered the kitchen. Melissa looked uncomfortable. "Maybe you could relax upstairs until everyone gets settled?" I froze. "Oh, it'll just be easier." The same word again. Easier. I went upstairs. From my bedroom, I heard laughter, music, conversations, the sounds of people enjoying themselves. I sat in my chair beside the window. For the first time since moving in, I felt like a visitor. Later that evening, Emily brought me a plate. "I saved you dessert." I smiled. "Thank you." She hesitated. "Why didn't they ask you to come down?" "I'm tired." She looked unconvinced. "You weren't tired." "No." She sat on the edge of my bed. "Grandma." "Yes." "I think sometimes Mom worries about what people think." "What do you mean?" "She wants everything to look perfect." I understood more than Emily realized. At 68, you've lived long enough to recognize when someone considers you part of the furniture rather than part of the family. December arrived. Christmas approached. I hoped the holidays would bring us together. Traditions matter. At least they mattered to me. I brought out Harold's ornaments, the handmade angel Daniel created in second grade, old family decorations. Melissa looked through the boxes politely. "We're doing a different theme this year." "Oh, everything is silver and white." I held the angel in my hand. "But Daniel made this." She smiled. "It's very sweet." The angel remained in the box. That evening, I sat in my room holding the small ornament. Daniel had written his name in crooked letters across the back. I remembered him proudly hanging it on our tree. Back then, our decorations had not matched. Our furniture had not matched. Nothing had been perfect. But we had been happy. A few days before Christmas, Grace visited. We sat together in the sunroom drinking tea. She studied me carefully. "You've lost weight." "I have not." "You have." "I'm fine." She leaned forward. "Are you happy here?" The answer should have been easy. Instead, I looked out at the lake. "I think they're busy." That wasn't my question. I smiled weakly. "They've opened their home to me." And I couldn't answer, because the truth frightened me. The truth was that I no longer knew where I belonged. My own house sat empty. This house didn't feel entirely mine. And somewhere between those two places, I had begun disappearing. That night, after everyone went to bed, I walked quietly into the family room. The Christmas tree glowed softly. The expensive silver ornaments reflected the lights. I placed Daniel's old angel near the back of the tree where no one would notice. As I turned to leave, I heard a voice behind me. It was Emily. She smiled. "Grandpa's angel." I nodded. "He deserves a place on the tree." She walked over and moved it to the very front. "There," she said. "What if your mother doesn't like it?" Emily looked directly at me. "Then she can move it herself." For a brief moment, I felt seen, but I also realized something else. In that large, beautiful house overlooking the lake, my 16-year-old granddaughter had become my only ally, and I was beginning to understand that being invited into someone's home did not necessarily mean being welcomed into their life. By the middle of February, Daniel began talking constantly about an important dinner. At first, I paid very little attention. His business dinners came and went regularly. Real estate clients, investors, developers, local politicians. His work seemed built around shaking hands and sharing meals. But this dinner felt different. "This could be huge," Daniel said one evening while scrolling through emails. If everything goes well, I might land 3 new commercial projects. Melissa immediately threw herself into planning. The dining room was measured. New table settings were ordered. Fresh flowers were discussed. A catering company was hired. Wine selections became an evening conversation. The house transformed into something that felt less like a home and more like a hotel preparing for important guests. One morning, Melissa stood in the kitchen making lists. I have 12 confirmed. 12 guests, I asked. 14 with us. I smiled. It sounds wonderful. She barely looked up. It needs to be perfect. That word again. Perfect. Everything in that house seemed to revolve around perfection. The following week, Emily and I were baking cookies together when I heard Melissa speaking quietly on the phone. We have to make the right impression. A pause. No, Daniel's mother lives with us. Another pause. She's older, but she's very independent. I wasn't certain why those words bothered me. Perhaps it was her tone, as if I were an object that required explanation. Emily noticed my expression. Grandma. It's nothing. But it wasn't nothing. 3 days before the dinner, I decided to contribute. My pecan pie had always been Daniel's favorite dessert. Every birthday, every graduation, every holiday, even when he attended college, he requested it whenever he came home. So I bought ingredients. Fresh pecans, brown sugar, butter. As I stood in the kitchen preparing the crust, Melissa entered. Oh, I thought I'd make Daniel's favorite pie. She hesitated. The caterer is handling dessert. I know. I just thought the presentation is already planned. I smiled gently. People can always eat pie later. She folded her arms. The menu has to stay consistent. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Emily appeared. Dad loves Grandma's pie. Melissa forced a smile. I'm sure he does. That evening, Daniel came home late. I mentioned the pie. He loosened his tie. Mom, Melissa has everything organized. I understand. He kissed my forehead. Don't worry about helping. Just enjoy the evening. Enjoy. The word sounded kind, yet somehow it made me feel unnecessary. A few days later, I opened my closet searching for something to wear. Most of my clothes had become too formal or too casual for life in Daniel's house. I eventually found the blue dress Harold had given me years before our final anniversary together. The dress had appeared briefly in my memory before. It was simple, elegant, navy blue. Harold used to tell me it matched my eyes. As I held it, I suddenly remembered the night he bought it. We had gone dancing. He had laughed when I complained about the price. You deserve beautiful things too. I sat on the edge of my bed, holding the dress against my chest. Sometimes grief changes shape with age. You miss different things. At 68, I no longer missed grand gestures. I missed someone looking at me as though I mattered. The afternoon before the dinner, Emily entered my room. You're wearing that one? She pointed to the blue dress. I smiled. Do you like it? It's beautiful. It belonged to a happier version of me. Emily sat beside me. You still look beautiful. Grandma. Teenagers rarely hand out compliments freely. That made hers precious. Melissa entered a few moments later. She looked at the dress. Oh, you don't like it? No, it's fine. Fine. Another word people use when they mean something else. She adjusted the curtains. We're expecting everyone around 6. What can I help with? Honestly, everything is under control. I could set the table. No, thank you. I could greet guests? We've got it covered. I nodded. After she left, Emily sighed. Mom acts weird when people come over. She's under stress. No. She looked directly at me. She acts like the house belongs in a magazine. I laughed softly. Maybe that's important to her. Emily shook her head. People are supposed to matter more. Those words stayed with me. The day of the dinner arrived cold and windy. Snow flurries drifted across the lake. The house smelled of expensive candles and catered food. Melissa moved through the rooms, adjusting flowers and polishing glasses. Daniel checked his phone constantly. Even Emily wore a dress she didn't particularly like. At 4 o'clock, I baked the pecan pie anyway, quietly. When the pie cooled, I placed it in the kitchen. No one mentioned it. Around 5:30, I dressed carefully. I fixed my hair, applied lipstick, fastened Harold's silver necklace around my neck. The necklace had been his final gift to me before he died. I touched it whenever I needed courage. When I walked downstairs, Emily smiled immediately. You look amazing. I laughed. I think you're supposed to say that. No, I mean it. Daniel emerged from his office. For a moment, his eyes softened. You look nice. Mom. Thank you. Melissa glanced at me. Her smile seemed forced. The necklace is pretty. It was Harold's gift. She nodded politely. Outside, headlights began appearing. Guests arrived carrying wine and gifts. Laughter filled the house. Men in expensive suits. Women wearing elegant jewelry. Business conversations. Investment discussions. Property developments. I stood near the fireplace, speaking with one of Daniel's associates. He seemed pleasant. How long have you lived here? I opened my mouth. Before I could answer, Melissa stepped beside me. Vivian moved in recently. Moved in? Not Daniel's mother. Not family. Simply someone who moved in. As more guests arrived, I noticed something strange. The dining room table had been expanded. 14 chairs? Then 13. I counted again. Perhaps I had made a mistake. I walked through the room slowly. One chair at the head for Daniel. One beside him for Melissa. One for Emily. 10 guests. 13. I stood there for several seconds. Emily entered behind me. What's wrong? I looked at the table. There aren't enough seats. Her face changed. She counted. 1, 2, 3. Her eyes widened. Grandma. At that moment, Melissa called from the kitchen. Everyone, dinner will be ready in 15 minutes. The guests laughed. Glasses clinked. Conversations continued. And standing beside the beautifully decorated table, I suddenly felt something cold settle inside me. Perhaps it was only an oversight. Perhaps another chair would appear. Perhaps I was imagining things, but as I looked around the room, I realized something that frightened me. For the first time since moving into Daniel's home, I wasn't certain there had ever truly been a place for me at all. And somewhere deep inside, a quiet voice began whispering that the worst moment of my life was only minutes away. For several long seconds, I stood beside the dining table pretending that I had counted incorrectly. Perhaps another chair was in the kitchen. Perhaps Daniel planned to bring one out. Perhaps someone had declined at the last minute. I wanted to believe that. At 68 years old, you become very skilled at protecting yourself from painful truths. Guests continued talking around me. Wine glasses clinked. Laughter filled the room. Outside, snow drifted softly over the lake. Inside, my heart had begun to beat harder. Emily remained beside me. "Grandma, it's all right," but neither of us believed it. Melissa appeared carrying serving dishes. She placed them carefully on the table. Roasted chicken, vegetables, fresh bread. Everything arranged perfectly. Still, only 13 chairs. Daniel walked in moments later. He looked tired, distracted. His phone remained in his hand. One of the guests asked him a question about a development project. He answered while taking his seat. I remained standing. Emily remained standing. Finally, Daniel looked up. For a brief second, confusion crossed his face. Then something changed, something I still struggle to understand. Embarrassment, discomfort, calculation. He stood halfway from his chair. "Mom?" The room grew quieter. Several guests looked toward us. "Yes." He glanced toward Melissa. She avoided his eyes. Then he said the words that would change everything. "Would you mind eating in the kitchen tonight?" Silence. Absolute silence. I stared at him. Perhaps I had misunderstood. "I'm sorry." "It's only because some of the clients are here." I felt my face grow warm. "I don't understand." Melissa stepped forward. "It's just that the seating became difficult." I looked at the table. 13 chairs. Exactly enough for everyone except me. Emily spoke immediately. "What?" Her voice was sharp. "Emily," Melissa warned. "No. Grandma lives here." Daniel rubbed his forehead. "It's only for tonight." One of the guests shifted uncomfortably. Another looked down at his plate. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. I looked directly at my son. The little boy who once slept beside me after his father's funeral. The teenager who promised to take care of me. The young man who cried at his graduation. The groom who thanked me at his wedding. And standing before me now was a stranger. He lowered his voice. "Mom, please don't make this difficult." Difficult. The word struck harder than the request itself, as though my existence had become an inconvenience, as though sitting beside my own family required negotiation. Emily stood up. "Dad, that's horrible." "Emily, no." Tears filled her eyes. "She's your mother." The room became unbearably quiet. I realized everyone was waiting to see whether I would argue, cry, become emotional, create a scene. Instead, I did something that still surprises me. I smiled, not because I felt happy, but because something inside me suddenly became very calm. Of course, I said. Daniel looked relieved. Thank you, Mom. Thank you. As though I had done him a favor, I picked up my plate. My hands trembled slightly. No one offered to help. No one offered their chair. No one said it was wrong. Only Emily. Grandma, I'm coming with you. No. I touched her hand. You stay. But, please. She sat down reluctantly. Her eyes never left me. I walked into the kitchen. The distance was only a few steps. Yet it felt like crossing an ocean. The kitchen lights were brighter, colder. The sounds from the dining room carried easily. Laughter, conversations, business deals, the clinking of silverware. I sat alone at the small breakfast table near the window. My plate rested before me. I looked at the food. Suddenly, I wasn't hungry. I thought about Harold. If he had been alive, none of this would have happened. Harold would have stood up. He would have offered his own chair. He would have said, "My wife sits with me." But Harold was gone. And Daniel had become a man I no longer recognized. Tears finally came, quietly, slowly. I did not sob. I simply cried. The kind of crying that comes when something breaks so deeply that there are no words. After several minutes, I heard footsteps. Emily entered. She carried her plate. No. I shook my head. Go back. She sat beside me. I'm staying. You shouldn't. I don't care. She wiped her eyes. What Dad did was wrong. I could barely speak. He's under pressure. She looked at me with disbelief. Why do you always protect him? I didn't know. Perhaps mothers never truly stop. Perhaps loving a child means continuing to search for the good in them long after everyone else has stopped looking. Eventually, I convinced her to return. Please. But go. Reluctantly, she left. I remained alone, outside the window. Snow continued falling. The lake had become dark. The kitchen clock ticked softly. From the dining room, voices drifted toward me. At first, I tried not to listen, but then I heard Melissa. After everything is settled. Another voice. So, Vivian still owns the old place, Daniel answered. For now. Someone laughed. That's quite an asset, Melissa spoke quietly. Eventually, everything will be ours anyway. I froze. The words barely reached me. I leaned closer. One of the men said, At least she's already living with you. Daniel sighed. It's been an adjustment. Melissa laughed softly. You have no idea. Another woman asked, Has she updated her paperwork yet? There was a pause. Then Daniel answered, We're working on that. My fingers tightened around the edge of the table. Working on that. The conversation continued. Pieces. Fragments. Words. Assets. Property. Planning. Investment. inheritance. I could not hear everything, but I heard enough. Enough to understand that while I sat alone in the kitchen, the people I loved were discussing my future as though I were already gone. My chest felt tight. Not because of anger. Not yet. Because of disbelief. Daniel had not simply forgotten me. He had already begun organizing a life after me. And perhaps the most painful realization of all was this. The humiliation of eating alone had not been the real wound. The real wound was understanding that my son no longer saw me as his mother. He saw me as a responsibility, an obligation, a problem to be managed. Footsteps approached. I quickly wiped my tears. The kitchen door opened. Daniel stood there. For a moment, neither of us spoke. "Mom." I looked up. He seemed uncomfortable, almost guilty. "You okay?" The question was so absurd that I nearly laughed. Instead, I simply nodded. "I'm fine." He shifted awkwardly. "We'll talk later." I looked at him carefully. My son. My only child. The boy I had sacrificed everything for. And suddenly, I realized something. He truly had no idea what he had done. No idea that something sacred had just died between us. No idea that while he entertained his guests in the dining room, his mother had quietly stopped being the woman who would give him everything. And as I sat alone at that kitchen table, listening to laughter through the walls, I made a decision. I said nothing. I argued with no one. I created no scene. But deep inside, I quietly began saying goodbye. I did not sleep that night. After the guests left, after the dishes had been washed, after the lights downstairs disappeared one by one, I remained awake in my room staring at the dark ceiling. The house had become silent. Yet inside my head, the voices from the dining room continued repeating themselves. Eventually, everything will be ours. We're working on that. It's been an adjustment. I had spent most of my life believing that pain came from harsh words, cruel arguments, anger. But some of the deepest wounds arrive quietly. A sentence overheard, a forgotten birthday, an empty chair at a dinner table. Around midnight, I heard footsteps outside my door. A soft knock followed. "Grandma!" It was Emily. "Come in." She entered wearing pajamas, her eyes swollen from crying. She sat beside me. "I hate them." "No, I do." I reached for her hand. "You don't hate your parents." She wiped her eyes. "I don't know who they are anymore." Neither did I. For several minutes, we sat quietly. Finally, she asked the question I had been avoiding. "Did you hear what they said?" I looked at her. "You heard it too." She nodded slowly. They didn't know I was standing in the hallway. My stomach tightened. "What exactly did you hear?" Emily lowered her eyes. "Mom said that once your house sells, Dad can finally stop worrying about money." I said nothing. Dad didn't argue. The room felt colder. "I think they believe you're going to give them everything." Everything. The word carried an irony neither of us discussed. because I already had my youth, my savings, my dreams, my energy, my marriage years, everything. Yet somehow, it had never been enough. Emily suddenly looked frightened. Grandma, you're not dying, are you? I managed a small smile. No. Then why do they talk like that? I had no answer. Eventually she hugged me. Please don't leave. I won't. After she returned to her room, I sat beside the window until dawn. The lake was frozen near the edges. The first sunlight slowly appeared. And for the first time since moving into Daniel's home, I began looking at my life differently. Not as a mother, not as a widow, not as a grandmother, but simply as Vivian Thornton, a woman, a person, someone who deserved dignity. The following morning, I came downstairs early. Melissa was making coffee. She looked surprised. You didn't sleep? Not much. She avoided my eyes. About last night, I waited. She adjusted a coffee cup. The seating situation became difficult. I studied her face. No apology. Only explanation. I understand. You do? Yes. Relief appeared immediately. Good. I was worried you might take it personally. Personally. How else could a mother take it? I smiled faintly. It's all right. And perhaps that frightened me more than anger would have. Because something inside me had become very quiet. Daniel came downstairs a few minutes later. He looked exhausted. His tie remained loosened. He poured coffee. Morning. Mom. Good morning. He hesitated. About last night. Again I waited. I appreciate you understanding. Understanding. Not apology. Not regret. Understanding. I nodded. The clients seemed impressed. He smiled slightly. It was a good night. A good night. I wondered if he remembered where his mother had eaten dinner. Emily entered the kitchen. She looked directly at her father. It wasn't a good night. The room became silent. Daniel frowned. Emily. No. She looked at both parents. What you did was wrong. Melissa crossed her arms. This conversation is over. Emily looked at me. Tell them. I couldn't. Not yet. Instead, I said quietly, please go to school. She stared at me. Then she left. The front door closed. Silence remained. Daniel rubbed his forehead. Teenagers. But it wasn't Emily who behaved like a child. Later that afternoon, while Melissa attended a charity meeting and Daniel worked from his office, I decided to visit my own house. I had not been there in nearly 2 months. The air inside smelled slightly stale. Dust covered the furniture. Sunlight entered through familiar windows. I stood in the living room surrounded by memories. Harold's chair, our photographs, the old piano. Everything remained exactly where I had left it. I walked into our bedroom. His side of the closet remained untouched. Sometimes grief becomes easier. Sometimes it simply becomes quieter. I sat on the edge of the bed, and suddenly I realized something important. This house still belonged to me. My life still belonged to me. No one had taken it. I had simply handed pieces of it away. While searching for old tax papers, I found a metal box in the closet. Inside were documents Harold had organized years earlier: investment statements, insurance records, savings accounts, property papers. I sat at the kitchen table reviewing them. Harold had always managed our finances carefully. Even after his death, I had continued following his system, and for the first time in years, I added everything together: the house, the investments, the retirement accounts, the insurance, the savings. The amount startled me. Daniel knew about some of it. Not all. Certainly not enough to understand the entire picture. I suddenly remembered Melissa's questions. The house, the accounts, the will, the paperwork. A cold feeling settled inside me. That evening, I returned to Daniel's house carrying the metal box. I placed it in my bedroom closet. At dinner, everyone behaved normally. Melissa discussed an upcoming fundraiser. Daniel talked about work. Emily barely spoke. At one point, Daniel looked at me. "You seem quiet." "I've been thinking." "About what?" I looked directly at him. "The future." He smiled. "That's good." Was it after dinner? I heard Melissa speaking quietly to Daniel in the kitchen. Their voices were low. Still, I caught a few words. Lawyer, paperwork, later, soon. I walked back to my room. The realization arrived slowly, like sunrise. Not sudden, not dramatic, simply unavoidable. They believed they were planning for my future. In reality, they were planning for their own. And perhaps the most painful part was not greed. It was assumption. They assumed I would continue giving, continue sacrificing, continue surrendering, because I always had. That night, I opened Harold's old address book. One name stood out immediately: Robert Ellis, Harold's closest friend, our family attorney for over 30 years, the man who helped us write our first wills, the man who attended Harold's funeral. I stared at his number for a long time. Then I placed the book beside my bed. Outside, snow began falling again. Inside the house, everyone slept peacefully. Everyone except me. Because while my son believed the story of my life had already been written, I was beginning to understand something important. The woman who sat alone in the kitchen was gone, and the woman who remained was finally ready to protect herself. Before turning off the light, I looked at Harold's photograph. His smile had never changed. Quietly, I whispered, "I think I finally see what's happening." And for the first time since that terrible dinner, I knew exactly what I needed to do next. In the morning, I would call Robert Ellis. The next morning, I woke before sunrise, for the first time in many years. I did not make coffee. I did not prepare breakfast. I did not ask whether anyone needed anything. Instead, I sat beside my bedroom window, watching the lake slowly brighten under the pale winter sky. Something inside me had changed. Not anger, not hatred. Those emotions burned loudly. What I felt was quieter, clearer, For most of my life, I had measured my worth by how much I could give as a wife, as a mother, as a grandmother. I gave time, money, love, sacrifice, and every time someone needed more, I found a way to provide it. But sitting alone in that kitchen several nights earlier had forced me to ask a question I had avoided for decades. What remained of Vivian Thornton after she stopped giving? The answer frightened me because I did not know. Around 7 o'clock, I heard Daniel moving downstairs. Melissa followed shortly afterward. I remained in my room. A soft knock came at my door. "Mom, come in." Daniel entered carrying a cup of coffee. For a moment, he looked like the young man who used to bring me tea when I was sick. "I made this for you." "Thank you." He sat in the chair near the window. Neither of us spoke immediately. Finally, he sighed. "I feel like things have been strange." I looked at him. "Do you?" He seemed surprised. "I know the dinner upset you." "Did it?" He rubbed his hands together. "It wasn't meant to hurt you." "I know." The clients were important. There it was again. The explanation. The justification. Never the apology. I asked quietly, "Daniel, if your father had been alive, where would he have sat?" He frowned. "What do you mean?" "At the table. Obviously with us." I nodded. "And why?" His face changed. Perhaps he finally understood. Perhaps only for a moment. "Mom." But I stood. "I have some errands today." He looked confused. "Do you need me to drive you?" "No." "Melissa can." "I'll manage." For years, I had always explained myself. That morning, I did not. After breakfast, I took a taxi into downtown Columbus. The city looked different than I remembered. Buildings had changed. Restaurants had closed. New businesses had appeared. Yet one office remained exactly as it always had. Ellis and Carter Attorneys at Law. The brass sign near the entrance had faded slightly. I stood outside for several moments. Harold and I had entered this building many times. When we bought our first house, when we wrote our wills, when we organized our retirement plans, and after Harold died. Robert Ellis had stood beside me at the funeral. He had helped me survive those first terrible months. I opened the door. The receptionist smiled politely. "May I help you?" "I'm Vivian Thornton." Her expression brightened. "Mrs. Thornton, Mr. Ellis will be very happy to see you." A few moments later, Robert walked into the lobby. He looked older, his hair completely white, his shoulders slightly bent, but his eyes remained exactly the same. "Vivian," he embraced me gently. "My goodness, you look exactly the same." He laughed. "You're a terrible liar." Inside his office, time seemed frozen. The same shelves, the same desk. Even Harold's photograph still sat among several family pictures. Robert noticed me looking at it. "He was my best friend." I sat quietly. For several minutes, we spoke about ordinary things: health, retirement, age. Then his expression softened. "Why are you here?" The question nearly made me cry, because for the first time, someone was asking what I needed. I took a deep breath. "I think I've made some mistakes." He waited. I told him everything: moving in, the small changes, the rules, the dinner, the kitchen, the conversation I overheard. He listened without interruption. When I finished, silence filled the room. Finally, he spoke. "Do you believe your son loves you?" The question surprised me. "I don't know." "That's not what I asked." I looked down. "Yes." "Do you believe your son respects you?" That answer came immediately. "No." Robert nodded slowly. "Those are very different things." He opened a file cabinet. Several folders appeared. The Thornton family. Harold had always been organized. Robert reviewed documents carefully. Investment accounts, insurance policies, retirement funds, property records, the house, the savings, the trust Harold had created years earlier. As he added numbers, his eyebrows slowly rose. "Daniel knows about all of this?" "Some of it." "How much?" "I'm not sure." He removed his glasses. "Vivian, your financial position is considerably stronger than you realize." I stared at him. "What does that mean?" "It means you've spent years worrying about becoming a burden when you're anything but." He turned papers toward me. There were investment accounts Harold had established decades earlier, stock portfolios, retirement funds, appreciation values. The old house had nearly doubled in value. Even I had forgotten certain assets. I felt overwhelmed. Harold never talked much about money. "He talked to me." Robert leaned back. "He wanted to make sure you were protected." Protected? The word felt strange. Because recently, I had felt anything but protected. "Has your will been updated since Harold died?" "No." He folded his hands. "Perhaps it's time." I stared through the office window. Snow still covered the sidewalks. People hurried below. Cars moved. Life continued. Meanwhile, I felt as though I had stepped outside my own life and was viewing it from a distance. Robert spoke gently. "You don't need to decide anything today." "I think I do." He remained quiet. For years, I had imagined my estate naturally passing to Daniel. Everything: the house, the investments, the savings. That had always seemed obvious. But suddenly, another question appeared. What happens when the person you planned to leave everything to no longer values the person who earned it? Robert finally asked, "What do you want?" "Vivian?" Not what Daniel wanted. Not what Melissa expected. What did I want? The answer came slowly. "I want to be treated like I matter." He nodded. "Then start there." We spent nearly 3 hours reviewing documents, organizing assets, making notes, discussing possibilities. Nothing was finalized, nothing signed. Yet when I finally stood to leave, I felt lighter, For the first time since moving into Daniel's home, someone had reminded me that I still had choices. Outside, the afternoon sun had appeared. I walked several blocks before calling a taxi. Halfway down the street, my phone rang. "Daniel," I answered. "Mom, where are you?" "Downtown." "Doing what?" I hesitated. Then I said the truth. "I had a meeting." "What kind of meeting?" I looked back toward Robert's office. "A personal one." There was a pause. "Everything okay?" I smiled faintly. "Yes." And for the first time in a very long time, the answer was beginning to become true. Because while my son believed I needed his protection, I had just discovered something important. Harold had spent his entire life making sure I would never have to depend on anyone, not even our own son. After meeting with Robert Ellis, I returned to Daniel's house feeling strangely calm. Nothing had officially changed. No documents had been signed. No decisions had been finalized. Yet something inside me had shifted. For years, I had lived as though my future belonged to everyone except myself. Now, for the first time, I began asking what I wanted. The answer was still unclear, but at least the question finally belonged to me. That evening, Emily knocked softly on my bedroom door. "Can I come in?" "Always?" She sat cross-legged on the carpet. "You seem different." I smiled. "Do I?" "You don't look sad." I thought about that. Perhaps she was right. Pain had been replaced by clarity, and clarity can feel surprisingly peaceful. She looked toward the metal box sitting beside my desk. "What's that?" "Old papers. Important papers. Very important." She studied me carefully. "Grandma, are you leaving?" The question caught me off guard. "No." "Because if you leave, I want to go with you." My heart broke a little. "Oh, sweetheart." She lowered her eyes. "Nobody listens to me here." I understood that feeling better than she realized. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Finally, she said, "You know you're my favorite person." I laughed softly. "You're not supposed to tell your parents that." "They already know." The following morning, Robert called. "Have you thought about our conversation?" "All night?" And I walked to the window. The lake shimmered beneath pale sunlight. "I don't want my money to become a reward for treating me badly." He was quiet. "That's reasonable." "I don't want to punish Daniel." "Then don't." His answer surprised me. I thought that's what changing a will meant. "No, Vivian, a will isn't punishment. It's a reflection of your values." Those words stayed with me. A reflection of your values. What did I value? Certainly not wealth. Harold and I had never cared much about money. Security? Yes, but not wealth itself. I thought about Emily, her kindness, her honesty, the way she had sat beside me in the kitchen, the way she defended me when nobody else did. Then I thought about Grace, the local senior center, the widows I had met over the years, women abandoned by family, women who became invisible. Suddenly, ideas began forming. That afternoon, I met Robert again. His office felt less intimidating this time. He opened a notebook. "Tell me what matters to you." I took a deep breath. "Harold believed education changes lives." Robert nodded. "He did." "I want to create a scholarship." "For whom?" I thought of the library where I had worked. Students who struggled, children who lost parents, young people who needed help, students who have lost a parent. He smiled. "I think Harold would approve." I continued. "I want to leave money to the senior center, the one where Grace volunteers." "Yes." He made notes. "And your family?" That question was harder. I stared at the desk. "I want Emily protected." "Protected from what?" I hesitated. "Becoming the kind of person her parents have become." Robert said nothing. Eventually, I spoke again. "I want her education funded." He nodded. "That can be arranged." "And Daniel." The room became quiet. My son. My only child. The boy I once carried through fevers. The young man whose college tuition I paid. The man who had asked me to eat in the kitchen. "I don't want him to receive everything automatically." Robert folded his hands. "Why?" "Because he stopped seeing me as a person. And if he changes," I looked out the window, "then perhaps he'll understand that inheritance isn't something children deserve simply because they exist." Robert smiled slightly. "You're stronger than you think." Was I? For many years, I had confused kindness with surrender. Perhaps many women of my generation did. We were taught to sacrifice, to forgive, to endure. But nobody taught us how to protect ourselves. Over the next several days, we worked carefully. Nothing dramatic, no revenge, no cruelty. Instead, we built something: the Harold Thornton Memorial Scholarship, a fund for students facing hardship, a donation to the senior center, educational support for Emily, a protected trust, and a revised inheritance for Daniel. Not eliminated, reduced, conditional. If he chose to contest the will, much of his portion would disappear entirely. Robert explained everything patiently. "Your estate should reflect your values." The sentence continued echoing in my mind. At home, however, another story was unfolding. Melissa had become increasingly interested in finances. One evening during dinner, she asked casually, "Have you ever updated your estate documents?" I looked at her. "No." Daniel spoke. "It's something you should probably do." "Why?" He shrugged. "Just to make things easier." Easier. Again. Always easier. "For whom?" I asked. He looked surprised. "What? For whom would it be easier?" Melissa laughed awkwardly. "We only mean that these things can become complicated." I took a sip of tea. "I suppose they can." The conversation ended, but I noticed Daniel watching me. Perhaps he sensed something. Perhaps not. A few days later, Grace and I met for coffee. She listened quietly as I explained some of my decisions. "You sound different." "Everyone keeps saying that." "You sound like Vivian again." The statement nearly made me cry. Because somewhere over the previous months, I had disappeared. Not entirely, but enough. I had become careful, quiet, invisible. Now I was slowly returning. When I arrived home that evening, Emily was waiting in the kitchen. She held several college brochures. "I want your opinion. We spent 2 hours discussing universities, scholarships, dreams, future plans." She wanted to study education, or literature, or perhaps social work. "I want to help people." I smiled. "Your grandfather would love hearing that." She suddenly became serious. "Grandma." "Yes. If something ever happened to you, would Dad get everything?" The question shocked me. "Why are you asking?" She stared at the brochures. "Because Mom talks about money a lot." I sat quietly. Children hear more than adults realize. "I don't know exactly what will happen." She looked relieved. "Good." I laughed softly. "That doesn't sound very supportive of your father." She met my eyes. "I love Dad." "I know. But sometimes I think people need consequences." Those words coming from a 16-year-old surprised me. Yet perhaps she understood something many adults ignored. Love without accountability eventually becomes permission. That night, I sat alone in my room. Harold's photograph rested beside my bed. The new plans were almost complete. The scholarship, the donations, Emily's future, my future. And somewhere within those decisions, I realized something important. Changing my will was not about taking something away from Daniel. It was about finally giving something to myself. Respect, dignity, choice. For the first time since moving into this house, I no longer felt powerless. I had spent my entire life building a legacy. Now I was finally deciding what that legacy truly meant. And although Daniel did not yet know it, the future he believed belonged to him had already begun to change. Quietly, carefully, just as I had changed. For nearly 2 weeks after my meetings with Robert, life inside Daniel's house became strangely quiet. Too quiet. No one mentioned wills. No one mentioned money. No one mentioned the dinner. On the surface, everything seemed normal again. Daniel went to work. Melissa attended her events. Emily went to school. I read books beside the window. But underneath that silence, I sensed movement, like ice slowly cracking beneath your feet. One Tuesday evening, Daniel came home unusually early. He looked nervous. Melissa was setting the dining table. Emily was upstairs studying. As I entered the kitchen, Daniel smiled. "Mom, can we talk after dinner?" "Of course." Melissa avoided looking at me. That alone told me something was wrong. During dinner, conversation felt forced. Daniel talked about interest rates. Melissa discussed a fundraiser. I answered politely. Emily barely spoke. Afterward, Emily carried dishes into the kitchen. Melissa immediately said, "Sweetheart, why don't you finish your homework?" Emily looked suspicious. "I can help. We've got this." Emily glanced toward me. I gave her a small smile. "It's all right." Reluctantly, she went upstairs. A few moments later, Daniel entered the living room carrying a folder. A folder. The moment I saw it, I understood. Melissa sat beside him. Her posture was stiff. Daniel cleared his throat. Mom, there's something we wanted to discuss. I sat quietly. He opened the folder. Some financial planning documents. There it was. Financial planning. Robert had warned me. Because of your age, Melissa added carefully. It's important to make sure everything is organized. My age, she smiled awkwardly. You know what I mean. Daniel leaned forward. It's only to help if something happens. What kind of something? He sighed. Mom. No. Daniel. What kind of something? His face tightened. If you became sick. If you needed help. If you couldn't make decisions. Melissa quickly added, it would protect you. Protect me. Another interesting word. Daniel slid several papers toward me. I've already talked to someone. I looked down. Power of attorney. Financial authority. Property management. Banking access. The words seemed to blur. Robert had been correct. They were not asking to help me. They were asking to control me. Why now? I asked. Daniel looked uncomfortable. We've been thinking about the future. I looked directly at him. Were you thinking about the future when you asked me to eat in the kitchen? Silence. Melissa crossed her arms. That has nothing to do with this. Everything has to do with that. Daniel rubbed his forehead. Mom, we're trying to help. By taking control of my finances. No. Then what are these? Melissa finally spoke more sharply. This is what responsible families do. I nodded slowly. Perhaps. Daniel pushed the papers slightly closer. You don't have to decide tonight. But his voice told me otherwise. They wanted an answer. Now. Melissa spoke gently again. We thought it would make things easier for everyone. Easier. Always easier. Never kinder. Never loving. Simply easier. I picked up the papers, turned pages slowly. Then I looked at my son. Did someone prepare these? A lawyer? Which lawyer? He hesitated. A colleague recommended him. I nodded. I see. Melissa relaxed slightly. Perhaps she believed I was agreeing. Instead, I folded the documents carefully. I'll have Robert look at them. The room froze. Daniel blinked. Robert? Robert Ellis. Melissa's expression changed immediately. Your old attorney. Harold's attorney. Daniel looked surprised. I didn't know you still worked with him. I do. Melissa spoke carefully. That really isn't necessary. It is to me. Daniel leaned back. It's only paperwork. No. I placed the documents on the table. It isn't. Nobody spoke. For the first time in many years. I felt no fear, only clarity. Melissa finally said, You don't trust us. The question lingered. I could have lied. I could have softened the truth. Instead, I answered honestly. I don't trust anyone who asks me to sign papers before apologizing. Daniel's face fell. Mom. No. I stood. You embarrassed me in front of strangers. I said I was sorry. No. Daniel. The room became very quiet. "You said you appreciated my understanding." His eyes lowered. Because he knew. For the first time, he truly knew. I continued. "You never apologized." Melissa stood. "This is becoming emotional." I laughed softly. "Of course it's emotional." She looked offended. "We've opened our home to you." I looked directly at her. And I was grateful. The silence that followed felt enormous. Upstairs, I heard Emily moving, perhaps listening, perhaps worrying. Daniel finally spoke. "What do you want us to do?" The answer came immediately. "Treat me like your mother." His eyes filled slightly, but years of pride stood between us. Melissa picked up the papers. "We'll discuss this later." "No." Both of them looked at me. "There won't be any more discussions about my finances." Daniel frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means my affairs are my responsibility." His voice grew tense. "Mom, we're family." "Yes." "Then why are you acting like this? Because you asked me to eat in the kitchen? Because you discussed my death over dinner? Because you planned my future without asking about my life?" But I said none of those things. Instead, I said, "Because I finally remembered that my life belongs to me." I walked upstairs. My hands trembled after I closed the bedroom door. Not because I regretted speaking, because I had finally done it. For the first time in my life, I had chosen myself. A soft knock came moments later. Emily. She entered quietly. I heard everything. I smiled sadly. I suspected. She sat beside me. "You were amazing." I laughed. I was terrified. "No." She shook her head. "You were strong." Strong. I wasn't certain, but perhaps strength is simply speaking the truth after years of silence. Downstairs, I heard Daniel and Melissa arguing quietly. Voices, tension, doors opening, closing. For the first time, their perfect house no longer seemed perfect. And perhaps that was necessary, because the illusion had finally broken. Before bed, my phone rang. "Robert." "How did it go?" I smiled. "Exactly as you predicted." And I didn't sign. "Good." I sat beside the window. Snow had begun falling again. The lake reflected the porch lights. For months, I had felt like a guest inside that house. An inconvenience, a burden, a woman waiting for permission to exist. Not anymore. Because Daniel and Melissa had finally shown me something important. They did not simply expect my love. They expected my obedience. And tonight, for the first time, they discovered that Vivian Thornton no longer belonged to them. The morning after my conversation with Daniel and Melissa, the house felt different. Not louder, not angrier, simply colder. Melissa moved quietly through the kitchen without speaking much to me. Daniel left for work earlier than usual. Even the lake outside seemed gray beneath the February sky. Only Emily behaved normally. She sat beside me during breakfast. "You okay?" I smiled. "I think so." She reached for my hand. Good. Those simple moments had become precious. Because everyone else in the house seemed to be waiting for me to apologize, waiting for me to soften, waiting for me to become the agreeable woman they had grown accustomed to. But something had changed, and all of us could feel it. 3 days later, Robert called. "The documents are ready?" My heart beat slightly faster. Everything. I scheduled an appointment for Friday morning. I told no one. That evening, however, something unexpected happened. Daniel knocked on my bedroom door. He looked exhausted. The lines around his eyes seemed deeper than usual. "Can we talk?" I nodded. He sat in the same chair where he had brought me coffee weeks earlier. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Finally, he sighed. "Things haven't been good." "No." He looked down at his hands. "I never wanted this." "What did you want?" He hesitated. "I wanted everyone to get along." I studied his face. When did that become more important than doing what was right? His eyes lifted. "Mom." "No." "Daniel." I spoke quietly. "When you asked me to eat in the kitchen, what were you thinking?" He rubbed his forehead. "I wasn't." "Exactly." He looked wounded. "I was under pressure." From whom? Silence, because both of us knew the answer. Melissa, the clients, the image, the perfect evening, everything except his mother. Finally, he said, "I made a mistake." The words surprised me, because they were the closest thing to an apology I had heard. I waited, but the rest never came. "No, I'm sorry. No, I hurt you. No, I was wrong. Only I made a mistake. The language of business, the language of problems, not the language of love." I asked him quietly, "If Emily treated you this way someday, what would you tell her?" He looked away. "I don't know." "I do." He remained silent. "I would tell her to leave the table." That night, after Daniel left my room, I cried. Not because of anger, because I finally understood something. My son loved me. I truly believed that. But somewhere along the way, he had allowed comfort, money, ambition, and approval to become more important than courage. And love without courage eventually becomes weakness. Friday morning arrived. I took a taxi downtown. Robert greeted me warmly. The final documents sat neatly arranged on his desk. He explained everything carefully. The scholarship fund, the educational trust, the charitable donations, the property arrangements, Emily's future, Daniel's inheritance. Nothing had been done impulsively. Nothing had been done out of revenge. Instead, every decision reflected what mattered to me. Robert finally asked, "Are you certain?" I looked at Harold's photograph sitting beside his desk. 35 years of marriage. Years of sacrifice. Years of building something together. And then I thought about the kitchen, the empty chair, The conversation about my future. I signed. One page, then another, then another. My hand trembled slightly. When it was finished, Robert closed the folder. It's done. The room became very quiet. I expected relief. Instead, I felt sadness, because changing my will did not erase the pain. It simply acknowledged it. Robert seemed to understand. You can still change it later. Maybe. People change. I smiled sadly.
Sometimes.
He looked directly at me.
And sometimes they don't.
As I prepared to leave, he handed me a small envelope. What's this? A copy for your records. I placed it carefully inside my purse. Outside, the sun had appeared. Snow melted along the sidewalks. For the first time in months, I decided not to return immediately to Daniel's house. Instead, I drove to my own home. I unlocked the front door. Sunlight filled the living room. Dust danced through the air. The house no longer felt abandoned. It felt patient, as though it had simply been waiting. I walked from room to room. The kitchen, the dining room, the bedroom, Harold's chair, our photographs. Everything remained. And for the first time, I asked myself a question I had been avoiding. What if I came home not to Daniel's house, here, to my own life? The idea frightened me. I was older now. Living alone carried risks. But another thought frightened me more. Growing old where I was merely tolerated. That evening, I returned to Daniel's house. Melissa was preparing dinner. Daniel sat reading emails. Emily was doing homework. Everything looked normal. Yet I carried something inside my purse that nobody knew about. The future had changed. Quietly. Completely. After dinner, Melissa approached me. Would you like to attend a charity gala next month? The invitation surprised me. Why? She smiled. It would be nice. I studied her. Was this kindness, guilt strategy? Perhaps even she didn't know. I'll think about it. She nodded. Later that night, I overheard Daniel and Melissa arguing softly. I wasn't trying to listen. Their voices simply carried through the hallway. You pushed too hard. I pushed. Yes. We're trying to help her. Melissa. What? You don't understand. A long silence followed. Then Melissa said something that chilled me. Everything we're doing is for this family. Daniel answered quietly. She is this family. The house became silent. For several moments, I sat on my bed, unable to move. Because, perhaps, for the first time in years, Daniel had defended me. Maybe too late. Maybe not enough. But something inside him was finally waking up. The next morning, Emily entered my room carrying coffee. You look happy. I smiled. I think I made an important decision. What decision? I looked toward the lake. I'm remembering who I am. She sat beside me. Good. Because somewhere between motherhood and sacrifice, between love and obligation, I had lost that woman, but she was returning now, slowly, quietly, and although nobody in the house knew it yet, the greatest change was not inside my will. The greatest change was inside me. Because Vivian Thornton no longer feared losing her son's approval. And once that fear disappeared, everything else began to change. The first signs of change appeared in Daniel long before he admitted anything. He became quieter. He spent more time alone in his office. He stopped discussing business during dinner. Sometimes I would find him sitting in the family room after midnight, staring at the dark lake outside. The confident businessman who had once controlled every room he entered seemed to be disappearing, and perhaps, for the first time in years, my son was finally listening to his own conscience. Melissa, however, became increasingly uneasy. She watched me carefully. She asked questions that sounded casual. Did you see Robert again? Have you been visiting your house? Are you thinking about moving back? I answered politely, I don't know yet. The truth was that I knew exactly what I wanted. I simply wasn't ready to say it. One Saturday morning, Emily and I were baking muffins when Melissa entered the kitchen. She looked tired. There were dark circles beneath her eyes. Can we all have dinner together tonight? Emily looked surprised. We eat dinner together every night. Melissa forced a smile. I mean, really talk. No one answered. That evening, the four of us sat at the dining table. The same table, the same chairs, the same room where I had once stood holding my plate. I noticed that Daniel kept looking at the empty chair beside him. Perhaps he remembered. Perhaps he could not forget. Dinner passed quietly. Finally, Melissa spoke. I think there has been a misunderstanding. Emily lowered her fork. I remained silent. Melissa continued. We've only been trying to protect you. I looked at her calmly. From what? She hesitated. The future. My future. Yes. I folded my napkin. My future was not the problem. Daniel finally spoke. Mom. His voice sounded different, smaller. We handled things badly. The room became quiet. Emily stared at him. I stared at him, because at last, after weeks of explanations and excuses, something honest had appeared. He nodded. Yes. Melissa looked surprised. Daniel continued. I should never have asked you to eat in the kitchen. The words hung in the air. The apology I had waited to hear. The apology that arrived far too late. Yet still, part of me felt relief. I was embarrassed. He admitted. Why? His eyes lowered. I wanted the clients to like me. I waited. And I was worried. Worried about what? He took a long breath. That you wouldn't fit in. The honesty hurt. Because at last, the truth had finally been spoken. My son had been ashamed. Not of me, of how I might appear. The woman who worked 2 jobs. The widow. The retired librarian. The older mother. Emily suddenly pushed her chair back. You should be ashamed of yourself. Daniel looked at his daughter. I know. Her eyes filled with tears. Grandma sacrificed everything for you. I know. You made her eat alone. His voice broke. I know. The room fell silent. Melissa looked uncomfortable. Perhaps she had expected this conversation to repair everything. Instead, it was exposing wounds that had never healed. After dinner, Daniel asked if we could speak privately. We sat in the family room. The fireplace burned softly. Outside, snow had begun falling again. He looked exhausted, older. For the first time in years, he looked like Harold. Do you remember the day Dad died? The question surprised me. Of course. I don't. I stared at him. What do you mean? He looked into the fire. I remember pieces. The hospital. You crying. The funeral. His voice trembled. But after that, everything is work. I said nothing. I watched you work all the time. He swallowed. You were always tired. I know. I promised myself I'd never struggle. There it was. The truth. Not greed. Fear. The fear of becoming poor. The fear of becoming powerless. The fear of becoming his mother. I thought if I made enough money, everything would be okay. I looked at him, but it wasn't. He shook his head. No. The tears finally came. My son, 42 years old, successful, respected, and suddenly crying like the little boy who had lost his father. I don't know when I became this person. I wanted to comfort him. Part of me always would, but another part understood that some lessons require pain. I think you stopped paying attention. He nodded. I think so too. He wiped his eyes. When you moved in, I wanted to help. What changed? His answer came immediately. Everything became about money. Melissa. He hesitated. Partly. And the rest? My job. The mortgage. The pressure. He laughed bitterly. I kept telling myself I was taking care of everyone. I spoke quietly. Sometimes taking care of people means seeing them. He closed his eyes. I didn't see you. No. I saw responsibility. The honesty almost broke my heart. Because it was exactly what I had already known. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Finally, he asked, Can you forgive me? I looked at my son, the child I raised, the man who failed me, the human being sitting before me. I already do. He looked surprised. But forgiveness isn't the same as trust. His face fell slightly. I understand. Do you? He nodded. You changed something. I said nothing. Didn't you? The moment had finally arrived. I could have lied. Instead, I answered. Yes. He closed his eyes. When, the night of the dinner, he took a deep breath. Did you change your will? Silence. The fireplace crackled. Outside, snow fell. Finally, I answered. Yes. He nodded slowly. Not anger, not shouting, only sadness. Do I still inherit anything? I looked at him. That's the wrong question. He lowered his eyes. After several moments, he whispered, Am I still your son? And there it was, the real fear. Not money, not inheritance, not property, love. I reached for his hand. You have always been my son. He began crying again. But you are no longer entitled to everything I own simply because you were born. He nodded. I know. And I didn't change my will because I hate you. Why? Because I finally learned to respect myself. For the first time in many years, Daniel truly looked at me. Not through me, not around me, at me. His mother, Vivian Thornton. A woman, a person, someone who mattered. And perhaps that was the moment my son finally understood what he had lost. Not the inheritance, not the money, not the house. He had nearly lost the woman who had loved him longer than anyone else ever would. 3 weeks after Daniel apologized, I made my decision. I was going home. Not because I hated my son, not because I wanted revenge, not because I could not forgive. I was leaving because forgiveness and living under the same roof are not always the same thing. Some relationships need distance in order to heal. I chose a Sunday afternoon. The lake outside had begun to thaw. Small patches of grass appeared along the shoreline. Winter was finally loosening its grip. Daniel sat reading in the family room. Melissa was organizing paperwork at the kitchen island. Emily was doing homework. I stood quietly in the doorway. We need to talk. All three looked up. Something in my voice made them immediately put everything aside. We sat around the dining table. The same chairs, the same room that had changed all of our lives. I folded my hands. I've made a decision. Daniel looked worried. What kind of decision? I'm moving back home. The silence was immediate. Emily looked shocked. Melissa froze. Daniel stared at me. What? I'm going back to my house. When? Next month? Emily's eyes immediately filled with tears. No. I reached for her hand. Sweetheart, you can't leave. I'll still be here. She shook her head. It won't be the same. No, it wouldn't. Daniel leaned forward. Mom, if this is about the dinner, it isn't only about the dinner. Melissa spoke quietly. Are you unhappy here? The answer deserved honesty. Sometimes. Daniel looked wounded. I thought things were getting better. They are. Then why leave? I took a long breath. Because I need my own life. Nobody spoke. For decades, I had organized my decisions around everyone else. Harold, Daniel, my students, my family. This was perhaps the first major decision I had ever made entirely for myself. Daniel looked down. Is it because you don't trust us? I answered carefully. It's because I need to trust myself. Emily stood suddenly. I'm moving in with Grandma. Melissa immediately reacted. Absolutely not. Emily looked furious. Why? Because you're 16. I'll be 17 soon. Emily. She turned toward her father. You let Grandma eat alone. Daniel closed his eyes. Please. No. She was crying now. You all act like everything is normal. Nobody had an answer, because she was right. Families often try to cover wounds instead of treating them. The following weeks became emotional. I began preparing my house. Grace helped me clean. Neighbors returned. The old curtains were washed. The garden was trimmed. Fresh flowers appeared in the kitchen. Every room slowly came back to life. So did I. One afternoon, Daniel visited the house while I was unpacking books. He stood quietly in the living room. I forgot how much sunlight this place gets. I smiled. Your father designed those windows. He walked through the rooms. His old bedroom, the kitchen, the basement. Memories seemed to follow him. Finally, he sat at the dining room table. The same table where he had done homework as a child. I used to feel safe here. You were. He looked at me. Did you feel safe at my house? The question hurt because it deserved an honest answer. Not always. He nodded slowly. I think I understand now. Do you? He looked around the room. You gave me everything? I said nothing, and I kept asking for more. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then he surprised me. I don't want your money. I looked at him. I believe you. Tears appeared in his eyes. But maybe I wanted what the money meant. What did it mean? He swallowed. That you still needed me. The answer broke my heart, because perhaps both of us had misunderstood. He believed money meant love. I believed sacrifice meant love. Both of us had been wrong. A few days later, Melissa asked to speak privately. We sat together in my old kitchen, the same kitchen where Daniel once ate cereal before school, the same kitchen where Harold drank coffee every morning. Melissa seemed nervous. I owe you an apology. I waited. She looked down. I grew up very differently. She explained things I had never known. Parents who constantly worried about money, evictions, debt, instability, a childhood built around fear. I promised myself I'd never live like that. I listened quietly, and somewhere along the way, I started seeing money as safety. She wiped her eyes. I think I began seeing your future as our security. The honesty surprised me. I never wanted to hurt you. I know. She looked at me. No, I don't think you do. Perhaps she was right, because I had spent so long viewing her as the villain that I had forgotten she was simply another frightened person making poor choices. I was jealous of you, she admitted. I looked surprised. Why? Because Daniel loved you so much. The answer stunned me. He talked about you constantly, She smiled sadly. You were the strongest woman he knew. I felt tears building. When did that change? Melissa looked toward the window. When he became afraid. Fear. Again. The hidden force beneath everything. The fear of poverty. The fear of failure. The fear of losing status. The fear of not being enough. Perhaps entire families break apart because people never admit what they fear. Moving day finally arrived. Daniel rented the truck. Again. But this time, everything felt different. Emily carried boxes while crying. Grace supervised. Melissa packed dishes. Daniel moved furniture. Nobody argued. Nobody rushed. When my chair was placed beside the front window, I sat down. Sunlight entered the room. The old clock ticked. The house felt alive. Daniel stood beside me. You sure? I smiled. Very. He nodded. I'll visit every Sunday. We'll see. His expression became serious. No. He took my hand. I mean it. For the first time in many years, I believed him. That evening, everyone shared dinner at my house. Not Melissa's dining room. Not the lake house. My dining room. My table. There were 5 chairs. One for everyone. Halfway through dinner, Daniel suddenly stood. Everyone looked at him. He walked into the kitchen. For a moment, nobody understood. Then he returned carrying his plate. He sat beside me. I just wanted to make sure I remembered where I belong. The tears came immediately. Mine, Emily's, even Melissa's. Because after all these months, my son had finally understood. A family table is not measured by elegance, not by clients, not by appearances. It is measured by who is invited to sit. And for the first time in a very long time, every chair was filled. 1 year later, I was sitting at my own dining table when Daniel knocked on my front door. The maple tree outside my kitchen window had turned red again. Autumn had returned. The same season in which my life had quietly begun to change. For several seconds, I simply watched him through the window. He looked older, not because of age, because of experience. His shoulders no longer carried the confidence of a man who believed he controlled everything. Instead, he looked like someone who had finally learned how little control life actually gives us. I opened the door. Hi, Mom. Hello, Daniel. He held a small pie in his hands. Pecan. My favorite. Or perhaps his favorite. Maybe both. I made it. I raised an eyebrow. You baked. He smiled nervously. It isn't very good. For the first time in many months, I laughed. Come inside. The house felt warm. Books lined the shelves. The old clock ticked beside the fireplace. Fresh flowers sat on the table. The life I had once feared losing had become the life that saved me. Daniel looked around quietly. You've made the place beautiful. It always was. He nodded. I suppose I never noticed. That sentence described much more than the house. I put coffee on the stove. Neither of us hurried. Time no longer felt like an enemy. During the past year, much had changed. Emily had started applying to colleges. She visited me every weekend. Grace and I volunteered together at the senior center. The Harold Thornton Scholarship had awarded its first student. Daniel had begun volunteering there as well, the first time he arrived. Several widows recognized him. "You're Vivian's son." He later told me that hearing those words embarrassed him. Not because of me, because he realized how proud people were of the woman he had nearly taken for granted. Melissa had changed too, not dramatically. People rarely change dramatically, but gradually. She called more often, visited occasionally. She apologized several times. Sometimes we shared coffee. Sometimes we spoke about nothing important. Sometimes healing happens quietly. Daniel sat at the kitchen table while I prepared coffee. Finally, he said, "I've been seeing a counselor." I turned toward him. "You have?" He nodded. "For about 8 months." I sat down. "What made you decide?" He looked at his hands. I couldn't stop thinking about that night. The kitchen, the dining room, the empty chair. Neither of us needed to say it. My counselor asked me something. "What?" He smiled sadly. "She asked when I stopped being a son and started being a manager." The words settled between us, because that was exactly what had happened. He had begun managing people, managing appearances, managing problems, managing me. And somewhere inside all that management, he forgot how to love. "I was always afraid," he admitted. "Of what?" "Ending up like Dad." I frowned. "Your father was a good man." "I know." His voice softened. "But he died young." I listened. He worked all the time. He worried about money. He sacrificed everything. He looked at me. "And after he died, you sacrificed everything." The room became quiet. I thought if I earned enough money, I'd never lose anyone. I felt tears building. But money can't stop people from leaving. No. It can't stop death. No. And it can't buy respect. I nodded. At that moment, I realized that my son had finally learned the lesson I spent an entire year trying to teach him. He stood and walked toward the window. I spent months worrying about the will. I remained silent. And one day, I realized something. He turned toward me. I wasn't grieving the money. "What were you grieving?" "The person I used to be. The little boy. The teenager. The son. The person who once promised to protect me." We both cried. Not dramatically, not loudly, just two people mourning what had been lost, and perhaps celebrating what had been found. That afternoon, Emily arrived. She burst through the front door, carrying college acceptance letters. "Grandma!" She stopped. "Dad." Daniel smiled. "Hey." She looked suspicious. "Are you behaving?" He laughed. "I'm trying." Emily spread the letters across the table. She had been accepted into several schools. One of them carried the scholarship fund that Harold and I had created. Her eyes filled with tears. "Grandpa's name is helping people." I reached for her hand. That's what he would have wanted. Daniel looked at the scholarship documents. I've been thinking. I waited. I'd like to contribute. I looked surprised. The center? The scholarship? The programs? He swallowed. If you'll let me. The answer came easily. Of course. Because this had never been about punishment. It had always been about understanding. That evening, the three of us prepared dinner together. Emily cooked. Daniel set the table. I made coffee. Outside, the sun slowly disappeared behind the trees. When dinner was ready, Daniel stopped. He looked at the table. 4 chairs, 1 still empty. Harold's chair. He gently pulled it out. For a moment, none of us spoke. Then he said, I think Dad would be proud of you. I smiled. I think he'd be proud of all of us. We sat down. Daniel across from me. Emily between us. The empty chair beside the window. And suddenly, I remembered the night I sat alone in a kitchen, holding a plate of untouched food. I remembered the humiliation, the tears, the loneliness, the decision that changed my life. Daniel looked at me. Mom. Yes. I'm sorry. This time there were no explanations, no excuses, no business language. Only those 2 words. I reached across the table and took his hand. I know. The will remained unchanged. Most of my estate would eventually support the scholarship, the senior center, and programs helping older people who had been forgotten by their families. Emily's education remained protected. Daniel's inheritance remained smaller than it once would have been. And he accepted that, because the inheritance he truly needed was never money. It was wisdom. Before he left that night, Daniel stood beside the front door. I'll come next Sunday. I smiled. You don't need permission. He hugged me. The embrace felt different. Not because the pain had disappeared, but because honesty had finally entered the room. After he left, I returned to the dining table, my own house, my own chair. For years, I believed love meant sacrificing yourself until nothing remained. I was wrong. Love does not ask you to disappear. Love does not ask you to eat alone. Love pulls out a chair. Love says, sit here. You belong with us. And for the first time in a very long time, I finally understood something. Changing my will did not destroy my family. It saved it. When I look back on everything that happened, I realize that the most painful moments in life are not always the loudest ones. Sometimes they happen quietly. An empty chair, a forgotten birthday, a conversation overheard through a doorway, a mother eating alone in the kitchen while her family laughs in another room. For many years, I believed that love meant sacrifice. I believed a good mother should always give more, forgive faster, and ask for less. I thought that if I loved my son enough, worked hard enough, and sacrificed enough, my place in his life would always be secure. But life taught me something different. Love without respect slowly becomes obligation. Sacrifice without boundaries becomes expectation. And when we spend our entire lives giving without protecting our own dignity, we sometimes teach others to value what we provide instead of who we are. Changing my will was never about revenge. It was never about punishment. It was not about money. It was about remembering that my life still belonged to me. As we grow older, many of us become afraid of disappointing our children. We stay quiet to avoid conflict. We accept small humiliations because we fear losing our family. But self-respect is not selfish. Boundaries are not cruelty. And choosing yourself after years of choosing everyone else is not a betrayal. Daniel eventually learned that inheritance is not something a child automatically deserves. Love and family are not measured by houses, savings accounts, or property. They are measured by kindness, gratitude, and the courage to treat people with dignity. I also learned that forgiveness does not mean returning to the way things were. Sometimes healing means creating a new relationship, one built on honesty instead of obligation. Most importantly, I learned that it is never too late to reclaim your voice. No matter your age, no matter how long you have stayed silent, no matter how many years you have spent putting yourself last, you still deserve a seat at the table. And if someone asks you to leave that table, you have every right to build your own. Thank you for spending this time with me and walking through this journey. If this story touched your heart, please share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever felt invisible inside your own family? What would you have done if you had been in my place? Please like this story if it meant something to you, and subscribe if you'd like to hear more stories about family, healing, and finding your voice later in life. And before you go, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. I always love knowing that somewhere, someone else is sitting at their own table, listening, understanding, and remembering that they matter too.